I'm so pleased that you've joined us as I want to introduce you to my after dinner leadership guest, Johnnie Moore. I was first inspired by Johnnie when I attended his creative facilitation workshop. And one of the things I loved was how he drew on his experience with improv theatre and brought it into the facilitation arena. It helped me to regain more enjoyment and fun in my group facilitation work. And in this conversation, listen out for his definition of unhurried conversations and some wonderful reflections on responding to high emotional states in a really resourceful way. Now, thankfully, we've got room around this dinner table for more people, so please remember to share this episode with someone that would also enjoy our after-dinner leadership conversations. So a very warm welcome to our after-dinner leadership table to Johnnie Moore. Welcome, Johnnie.
Hi, Simon. Good to see you.
Yeah, it's lovely to be with you again. As I mentioned in my intro, this is our relationship goes back to me being a participant on one of your workshops around creative facilitation, and I'm very grateful for the way in which you helped me to be more playful in the facilitation space and a little bit more free in terms of rather rigid in the way that space works. So thank you so much for that. We have a tradition on this show to go through some 1 minute of quick fire questions to get to know our guests in a fairly quick way. Are you ready for those?
I'm ready as I'll ever be. Bring it on.
Here we go. Name?
Johnnie Moore.
Organisation?
Johnnie Moore.
What is a characteristic that you value in others?
Enthusiasm.
What's a great piece of advice you've received?
I'm cycling through so many smart people that have given me good advice over the years, and I'm trying to choose the best. And I think the best advice was performed rather than given, because I think two of the most influential people in my life looking back were two people who taught me at university, and what they both succeeded in doing is conveying a sense to me that whatever I was thinking was interesting and useful, rather than me being measured against some abstract measure of intelligence and knowledge. They thought that they conveyed to me that I was inherently a worthwhile and interesting person, and I think that was one of the most valuable things that anyone could have done for me.
How did that get transmitted? How did you know?
I think one of them in particular was a guy called Roger Opie. He was an Australian economist, and he interviewed me for my place at uni, and he taught me in my first year. And I was terrible at economics. And I realised that every time I went to see him, I was not good at economics. I wasn't sure I knew much more about economics afterwards than before. But I always came out of his room feeling happier, more creative, and effectively more intelligent, because he just conveyed a kind of twinkle-eyed sense of enthusiasm for what I had to say.
Great. And what about the other person?
He was Jonathan Glover. He was a philosophy tutor, and he just always responded to what I had to say with intelligent questions that were never put downs or show offs. They were as if what I think he conveyed, and I think this is a great skill, as if what I'd said was inherently interesting and surprising, and not, as it must well have been, because he would have tutored thousands of students, something he would have heard 100 times before. He treated it as if something new had happened that he found interesting. And as I describe it to you, I think that's such a great quality to bring to any relationship. Can we do that for each other? I think that would be a fantastic thing.
Well, my recollection of working with you is that you did some of that. I think you convey those qualities pretty well yourself, actually. Very good. One of my other questions, I just have to go there. The time's gone out, but what's your go-to karaoke song?
Oh, I think it would have to be I'll Stand By You by the Pretenders.
Great. What does that take you back to?
It's such a fantastic song, because the first time I heard it and every time since, to me, this is a song about a mother to her upset child, and it's a song of emotional solidarity. I think that when they made the music video, they appeared to think, the people who made the song appeared to think this was a song about a relationship between a boy and a girl, boyfriend-girlfriend relationship, but they were clearly mistaken. That's not what the song is about. The song is about emotional solidarity, and it speaks to something that I probably didn't get enough of in my life, and that I think is incredibly valuable. And it's not unconnected to the answer that I gave to your previous question.
Yeah, yeah. Great. There's already a lovely little trend there. I like this idea of people engaging in something where they're feeling that the other party is inherently useful and interesting, and sincerely thinking so. I think is something that's a real gift that you can give to somebody else in a conversation or a meeting, isn't it? So great. I hope we can get some of that throughout this conversation too. One of the things that we also like to explore is 3 leadership lessons you wish you'd learned earlier. And I'd love to dip into those for you now, Johnny. What are they for you?
One, try it out rather than thinking about it too much. Do experiments sooner, faster, with a rough prototype. Try it in the crudest form rather than sit around talking about it, or in my case, which I'm rather prone to, thinking about it a lot.
Yeah.
More live experiments. I think that would have been. I wish I'd got that much sooner.
Great, love that.
What's
your number 2?
Number 2 would be, would be to ask myself, is it possible for whatever emotion I'm feeling, especially if it's a so-called negative emotion, fear, anxiety, anger. Is there a way to allow that emotion to fill me up and make me more solid, rather than, as I think I'm prone to do, and I see many others do, that you kind of leak it out anxiously all over other people and expect them to do something about it? So the possibility that anger could fill me up and make me solid is something that I've started to pay much more attention to lately, and I think I wish I'd understood this when I was a student. This would have been so helpful to me. So that's lesson number 2. Allow your emotions to fill you and make you more solid.
Great.
And again, I think I see a lot of people for whom that would be really good advice.
Yeah.
Leadership lesson number 3 would be, don't boss people about as much. I mean, again, I think it's connected to number 2. I mean, I think I used to think leadership was pestering people to get them to do what I wanted, rather than seeing if it's possible to draw something out of them.
Love it. Oh, those are 3. I want to jump into the second one immediately. I know you gave some elements there of description. I want to play some more with this metaphor. What's being filled up when you talk about this filling you up? What's the vessel?
Oh, well, that's an interesting question. So, I mean, I think if I think about it now, let's say, it might be anxiety or it might be anger. One of these I say. Yeah. So let's go with anger. It's like, I think anger often leaves me feeling like out of control with I'm so inflamed that I become very agitated. But when I do the switch, it's like, well, I almost think what if I take that energy and put it in my lower back, into my spine, so that I really feel my spine? What if it were there? And even describing it to you, I go, oh, that's so much more interesting as a way of holding anger. It's like, oh, what if it gives me more of a spine? That's straight away, all sorts of things are firing differently. I can feel it through my body. That's like, right. So I can feel anger and be solid. And then I become the sort of person, who isn't going to... I don't know what I would put words to, but isn't going to be made impotent by this feeling, but is actually going to be able to stand up for himself more and take a position. And I might be able to go, well, I don't like that. And even if it doesn't change, I know that I don't like it. So I'm not going to panic or flail around in response to it, and I'm not going to kid myself that there's something I could or should immediately do about it that will make it better, but I can allow it to give me more form. Yeah.
Wow. It's got me thinking. And I really like the idea and how that plays out.
It's like I sometimes, when I'm working with people, what I see people in leadership positions do is I see them not do that. So they think that they're being emotionally honest with their colleagues, but what they're actually inadvertently doing is kind of leaking out fear, anxiety, and frustration with them in a way that they don't really want to take on. So they end up saying too much, conveying a lot of frustration and anxiety, but not actually creating much certainty for the other person or willingness to actually be helpful. Whereas if they contained themselves more, they would actually get more out of their colleagues, because their colleagues would feel like they're in a relationship with somebody who is solid rather than someone who might do something crazy.
Yeah. So is that a way of saying that it's, from the team members' point of view, it might be reducing some of the perceived volatility in the relationship, that kind of thing? Is that, if I'm on the right lines?
Yes, I think that would be a good way to describe it. It's like, I think I had one boss in my advertising career who, looking back, I think was quite good at this. So the way he would talk to me about things he wanted is he would say he wanted them in the kind of manner of, he was quite sure that I would deliver. And as a result, I would think, well, that sounds difficult, but he seems to think I can do it, so I better try. Whereas other bosses would convey uncertainty that would make me feel, oh, maybe I can't do it. And maybe there's no way of satisfying this person, because, yes, I think that word volatile, they feel like they're a bit volatile. And it's like, whoa, I don't want to be around that. I better keep my head down. So, you know, somatically in my body, if I say, keep my head down, this is not a position from which you're going to get the best out of me, is it? Whereas where there's that expectation that I'll perform, it's like, oh, right, I better get upright here and deliver on this. Yeah. So I'm being stretched, but in a way that will grow me. Now that's interesting.
Yeah, I agree. And I'd love to come back to that first point as well, where you were saying about the maybe getting stuck in thought in preparation for something, is how I've interpreted your point. And this idea of taking action sooner, experimenting, trying things out. So it appears to me that there would be some risk management element that's going on there in terms of when's the appropriate time to move, when you're maybe someone who's more methodical or thoughtful about taking action. And how does someone, well, what's your experience in terms of learning to act sooner than perhaps you're comfortable to do so?
Well, I mean, I suppose one thing that occurs to me is I think people can get a bit binary about this. It's like as if the choice is you either think this or you immediately fully implement it. And I think the creative space is, well, is there a space where we could create an experiment where we can, you know, what I think Dave Snowden calls a safe to fail experiment? Could we do a version of this which we only show to our mates? Do I rehearse it in front of the bathroom mirror? So rather than think about it, do I actually perhaps stick a camera on, record it to camera, and then watch myself? So that's a safe to fail experiment. Nobody else gets to see that performance, but I've actually made a performance out of it, rather than just going, I don't know, or talking to my friends and going, I don't know whether I should. No. It's like, is there a prototype? Is there a space where we can experiment with making it? Yeah. And I think we often forget to do that. We act as if it's either thought about or immediately fully implemented. Yeah, whereas there's this territory to experiment, which is a lot more fun.
You mentioned about your advertising career. Did you notice? Yeah, when did you notice this as a thing? Was it during that time?
I think one of the first times I noticed it was, I'm trying to remember the specific incident, but I remember there was a phase in that when I was working in a rather sort of esoteric area of financial services where we were doing fund launches, which were very highly regulated. And we noticed, my partner and I at that time, that we'd go to meetings and we would ask, could we do this? And the lawyers or the corporate financiers, oh, no, you can't do that. You can't do that. You can't do that. And we started going, but what if we did this? And we'd write them a copy prototype, and then we'd go and ask some other people and find out that, well, we could, or that the rules weren't like that. So we started to sort of question the apparently authoritative statement of it can't be done, and ask, well, who says, and where is the rule for that? And what if we tried this? I think that was the beginnings of that urge to test and prototype. It was also a phase where we would often just, I mean, not for an advert which was going to be regulated, but for some of our creative ideas, seek forgiveness rather than ask permission. We'd just prototype it, on our own and present it half finished rather than asking if they would like the idea.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I like that. Really good stuff. Now, I'm mindful in all of this. One of the things that I've really enjoyed in the initial conversations that we had, but also subsequently seeing your posts on LinkedIn and just following your conversation, this term of unhurried conversations. And actually, as I'm saying that out loud, I realize that in the quick fire questions, I've kind of done the opposite, giving you 1 minute to ask quick questions, and I'd love to explore the power of this idea of unhurried conversations, and maybe start with some definitions first of all. What do you mean by it? And then let's talk about its application. Yeah.
So, thinking about what you've just said, part of the origin of this, there were sort of two strands to this happening. One was a conversation I had with a friend of mine when I moved to Cambridge might be 10 years ago now. We were both fans of improv theatre and we both performed in it occasionally. And we loved it, but we then admitted to each other over a coffee that sometimes it's excruciatingly bad and painful to be in and watch. And, I'd been in one or two performances where I just wanted to go home and hide afterwards because they were terrible. And he said, I remember him saying to me, he thought good improv, he said, was unhurried. And that word just resonated. I thought that was really good. And what he meant was when it's unhurried, the actors aren't tripping over each other and they're not having too many mad ideas, that there's a pace to it where you feel like they're staying in relationship and the scene builds elegantly, and that's very, very satisfying. So that's when unhurried landed on my radar, because I thought, oh, well, that would be true for a lot of things in life, not just improv theatre, that when the pace is right, things build in a rather beautiful way. And the nice thing about unhurried is it doesn't necessarily mean slow. So, if I think back to 10 minutes ago when we did that quick fire thing, I thought, well, this is fun. I quite like being put on the spot. I didn't feel like I was being hurried. I was going at a fast pace, and I think we sparked off each other. So I would say that still counts as... It's certainly not didn't feel rushed to me. So unhurried doesn't always mean slow, and I think that's important because sometimes we need to move quickly. I always think of, if you watch the pit crew in Formula One, they move incredibly fast, but they don't set fire to each other because they've got that down to a T. So I would say they're kind of unhurried, even though they're very fast. And around the same time, I was going to networking events here that I couldn't stand because they seemed to be very anxious, full of men interrupting each other. And I found that quite uncomfortable. And I actually created an alternative event with a conversation where we deliberately didn't interrupt anybody. We actually used a talking stick. And if you held the stick, you talked. So nobody else would interrupt you. It was guaranteed that you wouldn't be interrupted. And I just did it as an antidote to these very frantic meetings. And I enjoyed them. And I then thought, I'll call them unhurried conversations. That's a good word to describe this process. So those two things sort of happened around the same time. And that's where the idea of an unhurried conversation came from. That's the origin story.
Love it. Love it. And thanks for sharing that, because I didn't know. I when we worked together, you shared about the talking stick as part of that. I hadn't realised it had come from the improv side as well. That's good. And its application to leaders in an organisation, where do you see unhurried conversations would benefit companies, organisations?
I mean, I suppose what I realise is that particular format, conversations with the talking stick, capital U, capital C, unhurried conversations, are, I do them in a variety of contexts. And I wouldn't automatically say that's the thing that all organisations should do. I think it's a process that many would find a bit odd if you just sprung it on them. And I wouldn't necessarily say, do this. I think doing it a lot, because I've run a lot of them, I've done hundreds of them since I started doing them, has given me a lot of practice at understanding that when you do slow things down, you start to understand more things are possible in groups of human beings, and that you don't necessarily need a lot of structure for a lot of interesting, creative things to happen. They can happen more naturally, more serendipitously, more spontaneously when you don't essentially rush and force things. So whether you use the talking stick or not, I think that's not the most important thing, but a mindset of being a little patient with people, not rushing them, being a little more comfortable with silences, just practicing waiting, in a conversation, if there's what people would call an awkward silence in a conversation I'm facilitating, I think I'm much better now than 10 years ago at waiting and smiling pleasantly and waiting and waiting and waiting. And instead of saying something clever to move things along, just being a bit patient. And I often find that when that silence is broken, it's often broken by someone saying something really unexpected and interesting that was worth waiting for.
Yeah. Yeah, you put some interesting warnings in that. Certainly I've taken them. The facilitator not rushing in to almost try and rescue either themselves or the group from some perceived embarrassment of this space, suddenly, it's like the awkward silence that you've mentioned. I really like that. How have you developed the art of patience around that, Johnny? Because it could be tricky for some. Put my hand up. Of being patient.
I think it's tricky. It's always tricky, and it never feels that comfortable. I always feel, I can sort of feel my body going inside. Part of me wants to panic and wants to do something, wants to say something clever, and occasionally I will. Yeah. But I think it's practice. It's just enough experiences of waiting and then being rewarded with something good allows me to go, okay, well, even though this feels a little uncomfortable, even though I'm sitting here imagining they're thinking, well, he's the facilitator, he should be doing something, I'm not going to. I'm going to here's another chance to practice sitting with my anxiety. I suppose this is a little bit of an echo of what I said earlier, really, of having this anxiety and instead of acting on it, containing myself. And I can think of quite a lot of experiences, quite a few recently, where I've been in meetings where there's been quite a tense conversation between two people in that meeting, and they've been pretty fierce, angry, heated, high-stakes conversations. And I have not said much. I've waited, I've been attentive, and I've realised that the other people in the meeting are sort of watching me, and they're noticing that what I'm doing is I'm not interrupting, I'm not panicking, I'm present to it, and I'm sort of conveying it's okay. It's okay for these people to be fierce with each other. This isn't the end of the world. I might occasionally interrupt to stop them from interrupting each other, but I won't do too much. And I'll know that I don't need to fix this. This is probably okay. And also with these sorts of conversations, they'll resolve themselves probably over time if we don't insist that we have to resolve it now. Sometimes it's enough that people have expressed their views and you can leave it, come back to it tomorrow, by which time actually lots of things will have changed and other people would have said things. And that we don't have to sort of just because the meeting ends at 4:00 doesn't mean we have to end with everything resolved. Sometimes the role of the meeting is to bring things to the surface that need to be processed later. So I think I've become more patient with practice. It just takes practice. It's not that it ever feels safe. I think that's what I think when I train facilitators, that's the thing that I think they go, oh, I see. So you never feel comfortable. Oh, well, that's a bit of a relief then, because I think people operate as if somehow you're meant to be comfortable. And I think it's more about how you hold your discomfort.
Yeah. Well, that's really helpful. I noticed that more. I've noticed that very evident in a one-to-one coaching scenario where you're, say, maybe 3 or 4 weeks later meeting with the person again, and much of the work was done outside of the last conversation. So it just sparked a whole series of thinking and just ideas that didn't happen in the 60 to 90 minutes that we were talking. They happened subsequent to it, and then it's like, oh wow, it was the catalyst to other things happening that has been really interesting. So I've seen that a lot in coaching, more obviously. I do feel I have a tendency because I've got this role as facilitator to try and tidy things up at the end of the session and make sure it's kind of neat and complete and harmonious and kind of resolved. And I can see that there's some merits to that in terms of tidiness, but probably not so much in the realities of where emotions and people's thought processes go.
Yes, well, I think there's a role for tidying up, and some things do get tidied. I think it's also good to acknowledge what work is still to be done. And I mean, I can think of something I did recently where I ran a process throughout a morning for a group of about 25 people, and for various reasons it didn't run to time because some really useful, interesting things happened, and so we had to, instead of ending it with a really satisfying kind of go-round process, we ran out of time. But what I found myself saying was, so we've run out of time, so we'll just end. I'll end by thanking you. And there are some things that aren't resolved, but that's okay because this is just the start of a process anyway. You will continue to be talking about this for the next 3 months, and they will look to me as if that was a very intelligent thing, and that was true. It didn't need to be tied up with a bow today. That had a good meeting, lots of things had been learnt, and there was a good reason to stay in contact with each other. So sometimes leaving things unfinished is a way of committing to staying in relationship. Sometimes the urge to tidy everything up is almost as if we don't want to have a relationship after this. We want to end it by tidying everything up.
Yeah, great. Could we transition a little bit into talking about energy? And you have, one of the things that I remember of working with you is you got this, maybe I'll take that, enthusiastic energy, which is how I've interpreted it. And thinking about how we manage energy levels, the older I get, the more, I've talked about this a lot over the last few weeks, so it's present on my mind, but how you ensure the right level of energy is brought to something, how you renew your energy, that kind of elements. I'd love to just get your thoughts and insights. How do you bring the right energy to a group, and how do you manage your energy levels?
It is a great question. I mean, I suppose the first thing is there seems to be a default setting that we are meant to energize the group, and what energizing appears to mean in that is higher and more stimulating. So it's very easy to end up being a bit hyper.
Yeah.
So, for example, people come back from lunch, and you could tell that the thing to do is to wake them up with a very boisterous game. I tend not to do that. I'm much more likely to send people off for a walk after lunch, because actually go off, pair up with someone, have a nice walk, get some fresh air, allow your digestive juices to kick in. And, often it's the highlight of the day. It's the best part of the day is the walk, which is quite funny really, because it's the thing I have least to do with. So I think managing the energy is knowing whether you're trying to raise it, up it to high level energy, and sometimes that's good, or whether you want to create space and actually slow things down and take a break. And often if in the meeting I've done some quite stimulating games or activities, I think what happens is I notice for myself that although I'm feeling quite stimulated, I'm also feeling a bit tired, and I might want to sit down and slow things down and run a slower and more reflective process. So I think the way to sustain energy with the group is not always to be looking to be up, but to allow a flow, an ebb and flow, and not sort of, to go back to my word unhurried, not to be in a constant state of rush.
Yeah. What about for you personally? How do you renew your energy?
I wish I was better at it, because I think the work is tiring. It'd be nice to sit here and paint this picture of myself as this deeply chilled out character, which I'm afraid I'm not. So after I've done, if I've done a gig, especially if it's a multi-day gig, I need to program in time off to just chill and recover and get my energy back, because I think however skilled you are as a facilitator, it's a very draining thing to do. You are sort of being paid to carry some of the psychic load for the group. So the work is, I think, often quite tiring and exhausting. So I think it's I try not to do events back to back if I can help it, because it just takes time to recover. I think one of the things that's most helpful to me is to debrief with a friend. Or a supervisor. I have a supervisor, someone, you go and have a chat with them where you spend an hour afterwards just describing what happened, and they don't have to say very much. They just have to listen attentively while you process all the things that happened, because I think it's a very stimulating activity, facilitation. If you do a gig, as I like to call it, a lot happens. There's a lot to think about and unpack, and it's quite nice to unpack it with someone rather than be on your own with it. And I always think for people who work in companies where you're in a team, it's set aside a time for your partners in the team to chew over what happened and reflect on what happened. Not because you've got to lead to, not necessarily to reach some deep conclusions, but just to process all that's going on, to allow yourself to sort of chew over what's happened. I think that's part of, I think the skill of managing your energy for this stuff.
Yeah. Do you have an example where you can think of a situation where you had a group that were not pleased to be there and you helped to engage them and to facilitate an effective outcome? Have you done any of that work?
No, I don't get too many of those. I do think that perhaps because I'm quite good, I think I'm quite good at making it clear early on that you're allowed to come to this meeting and feel reluctant, unconvinced. I sometimes ask people, for example, to, form a line about how up for it they're feeling at the moment. At one end of the line, feeling really hyper, and at this end of the line, if you'd sooner be somewhere else. And I do it in a very light and playful way to give a lot of permission to be at the reluctant end. So I say, you might be at this end because you don't like the look of me. That gets a laugh. Well, maybe you just haven't had enough coffee yet. That would be a perfectly good reason. And I'm often at that end of the meeting. I often come to a meeting, I'm not quite ready for it. So I make it very okay to be at that end of the line.
Yes.
Whoever takes the position at the end of the line, I engage with them and say thank them for being very honest. That sort of signal it's okay to come to this with reluctance. And going back to what I said about not seeing it as your role to somehow get the group up, is to legitimate not being up, and to indicate it's okay to have different levels of energy and different views. And I think that. So people talk about icebreakers, and they often mean a boisterous game. I think the way that you allow people to join you is to be accepting of where they are, if you like. I think that's how you work with a group that might be feeling sceptical and reluctant, is not to be rushing them and to be very honest with them and to be noticing what's going on and be curious and interested. Back to how we started the conversation, some of the qualities those tutors, I think, embodied.
Yeah, brilliant. So what are you looking forward to when you look ahead to the future?
Well, that's a good question. I don't know. I'll say this because this has been on my mind this year a lot. I wonder if we're entering an interesting period of change and discontinuity in this country, on this planet. I have an increasing sense of old systems creaking, and of new ways of working really needing to emerge. And you might not note it, you might not think it, because superficially everything's carrying on as normal, but I think there are stresses and strains. And I think people are hungry for more humane ways of working. I think they're hungry for greater emotional honesty. So I guess I'm leaning into that way of being myself, because I'm starting to get the feeling that people like it. So more of that, I think, would be good, and less automatic rushing out to, buy more stuff, consume more things, and get more frantically busy. Less of that.
Yeah. So what would I notice different about you in 12 months' time that reflects that?
The mad answer that comes to mind, I'm not sure if this is a very good answer, but it's like, I think you'd find me busier, which is very funny and ironic, isn't it, really? I think I'd have more demand. I mean, I have plenty of work, but I think I would be more in demand. So I might be having to manage my own energy and smoke my own dope as far as being unhurried is concerned.
Very good. Very good. Johnny, I always enjoy conversations with you, and also seeing your insights that come through the short videos that you record as well. I think you have a fresh take on the world, which I really enjoy.
Thank you, Simon.
Your natural curiosity is something that I admire a lot. And
well, thank you. Thank you. I've thoroughly enjoyed talking to you. So thank you for all your questions and drawing it out of me. So back to what I said, I think you've done for me what I saw those tutors do for me all those years ago. So thank you.
Yeah. And what has been a takeaway for you from this conversation?
I'm reminded of how much I enjoy doing this. And that, you mentioned my videos, they're quite fun to make and they're quite short, that actually I am much happier in a conversation than I am writing long thought pieces. I actually come to life when I'm talking to someone who's interested and interesting, that I think brings the best out of me. And I think I noticed that I'm less and less able to read long books and watch long movies and listen to long talks. I actually like conversation more than anything, and this has been a good example of that.
Great. Well, it has been for me. I've taken several things. I look forward to listening to this again, actually, because there were some early points which I didn't make notes because I was so into the conversation. But I like this idea of unhurried not being about the pace of the conversation. I think that might have been a bit of a misunderstanding coming into this conversation for me. There was something around the speed, and I love the pit stop example. Actually, that's been really helpful of seeing unhurried in a slightly different, well, very different.
Yeah, it's
light,
about
actually, to
being able to sync up with each other, and I think that's about. If it is about pace, it's about variety of pace, not having a single fixed pace, either slow or fast. But what's the pace that's appropriate to the task at hand?
Yeah. One of the questions I think you've posed on this: how can we work in a way that makes the most of our human qualities at a speed that works for us? And there's some wise words to finish on.
Who said that? That sounds quite good. That sounds plausible. Did I say that? That's good.
I think you did. Johnny, thanks so much. It's been a real delight
Simon.
to meet with you again, and I look forward to our next conversation. And thank you for what you're doing to help people have unhurried conversations. Thank you.
Thank you, Simon.